Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy.
Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. So let's talk about how a lie can become a law as it relates to race and identity on this episode. Really important how a lie can become law. And we know there's a lot of that going on right now. But before we dive into it, let me introduce our guest. We have Dr. Helen Neville. And so happy that you're with us, Helen. You're an expert in this, and we look forward to all that you have to say. And let me also introduce our savvy panelistas. We have Dr. Maria DeLongoria, Tobie Stein, Phyllis Throne, and Jennifer Jones Austin. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining. So one big lie, I guess it's fair to say, is race. Race is a lie. Race is a lie. Talk to us, Helen, about why race is a lie.
That is such a great, I love starting off with that. When many times when people think about race, they think it's biological, right? They think that people are one race or another and that biology makes that. And in fact, it's a lie because race is actually a social construct. People across racial and ethnic groups have more in common than many times in terms of genetically, than many times that people from the same racial or ethnic group. So what does it mean when we think about race as a social construct? That means that this whole category or myth of race was created for a particular purpose. It's a purpose of controlling people, a purpose of power, domination, and exploitation. And many times, particularly in the Western world. And so the idea of what race is socially constructed in a given demographic or given country. So what's Black here in the United States is not really what's Black, say, in Brazil or what's Black in South Africa. The notions, what is white is a legal kind of term that has always been changing and shifting in terms of the United States. So the idea of it being a social construction, it is designed for a particular purpose. And many times that purpose is for exploitation.
So at what point in time did this occur in this country? When we're talking about design and whiteness and that kind of thing, at what point in history did this all take place? For our viewers?
Well, I think if you look at how it developed in this country, right? Because I'd be hard pressed to say it started on Wednesday, January 3rd, or what have you. But when Helen references it being constructed for a purpose, right, for exploitation, in this country, it was really for that purpose of enslavement, right, and for capitalism and for profit, and so that. And in addition to that, though, so to create a certain type of society, the original settlers, I don't want to say original settlers, let me take that back. The original colonizers, right? The original colonizers had a plan, and they wanted a society that was a white society. And the things that they put in place, the structures and the systems that they put in place were designed to support that endeavor. That included having a category of people that were on the bottom of the social stratus, right? Because you can't have any kind of wealth or any kind of, what's the term I'm looking for?
Property?
Yeah, but not property, because it was more of to create the system that existed, right? You have to have, in order to have wealthy, you have to have a poor, right? And so you have to create this. They were creating this poorer class, and they didn't want this poorer class necessarily to be white poor class, because there was at one point a white poor class, and that class was getting too large and too disgruntled. And so this system was created to create more division between that white poor class and enslaved people or free people or native people.
Wasn't there a time, though, when the poor classes were together, meaning this was an intentional strategy So wasn't there times in history at the beginning of this country, I was reading about some sort of Bacon rebellion where, yeah, could you talk a little bit about that, where there was a togetherness, so to speak, against the aristocracy?
So I didn't go into that, but when I said that there was developing this poor white class, right? So this poor white class was banding with natives who were being treated in ways that were detrimental to their existence, that free blacks were being treated in ways that were detrimental to their existence, as well as enslaved people. And when you saw, when the aristocracy saw this unity developing, right, and this rebellion developing, they said, okay, we can't have this, but we also don't want all those poor white people now to be rich. So we have to figure out a way to make them think that they're better than the other groups. And one of the techniques they used was, for example, using Native Americans to capture runaway enslaved people, using enslaved people and free black people to raid Native American camps, right? So that creates a division and a distrust. And then they also made this disgruntled group of and this poor white class, for the most part, were former indentured servants, right? And so there was an intentional plan to create rift between them and then those natives and those people of color. And so what you had was this class of poor white people being led to believe that they were better than this class of people of color who were enslaved or free. And that kind of serves that purpose of creating this racial stratification.
I realized that I was in old paradigm when I would talk to my children about people that were biracial. I said, well, they're not biracial, they're black. Because when I grew up, there was the 1/8, 1/16, 1 drop rule. Helen, how has that changed? Or has it changed?
Wow. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. The new generation is a different kind of generation in terms of definitely than I was. I was born pre-loving, and my dad is white and my mom is black. And never in my life have I ever said I'm biracial. And never have I talked about it in that way. And I think when we think about biracial and those kind of statements, it buys into this notion that there is such a thing as race and not that it's social construction. And so I think this is a newer thing about a biracial identity. We see it really emerging when white women are having black babies. That's when we see it emerging. And we see that they are wanting to distance their children from blackness. So they're socializing them as you're not black. And they are also pushing for legislation to separate their child out from blackness. And what this does is it prevents us from taking a look at the ways in which black people are being treated. Regardless if one parent is white or not, you're going to experience, your lived realities are going to be like a black person. And I want to make sure that your lived realities aren't just something negative, just experiences of discrimination. Your lived realities can also be an experience of joy and cultural strengths. I'm just thinking about the Colin Kaepernick piece. I'm not sure if anybody saw that, but here's this, biracial person adopted by this family that has high levels of racial color blindness, people who deny, distort, minimize the existence of racism. And he has to struggle through to understand who he is as a black man. So his notion of biracial stuff falls by the wayside. And in this, he understands that there's discrimination and it's systematic, but he also understands, particularly among black folks in the US, there's a sense of joy and cultural strengths.
But oh, go ahead, Jennifer. Go ahead. Yeah,
I'm really intrigued by this last point about, persons whose parents, a person whose parent is white, and another parent is of color. This biracial notion, and that it feeds into the narrative. And the construct. It's interesting because I never quite thought about it in that way. I really saw it. I get what you're saying, but I also just kind of saw it as people embracing their identities, not in a negative way, but rather in a positive way, and all that comes with it. And I guess, the point that you make about white mothers with Black children trying to kind of disregard their Blackness, is that geographical? And I ask because I know many white women with children of color who live into their children being of color and trying to make sure that they identify. But a lot of these people are in the Northeast. So I'm just curious with that, what you're talking about. Is there any geographical element to it?
Okay. Oh, you raised such really good questions. I just have a couple of comments. Like on the first comment of people embracing their multiple identities. Of course, we want folks to do that. However, what does it mean to embrace? I'm particularly talking about people who are Black and white. What does it mean for Black people to say, I'm white? What does that mean? Are they embracing the fact that they have privilege in the society? Is that what they're embracing? Or is it a distancing from being Black to say, I'm different from, I'm better from? That's the way I think that it is. It's a distant. It's different if you are, say, like Naomi Osaka. She is Japanese and Haitian, and she embraces both of those. And I think she does a beautiful job of that. That's very different than someone who's half white. In terms of geographic, I'm thinking that I don't have all the data on this, but I am thinking that it is across the country because we see people pushing legislations like, I want for my child to be able to mark multiple boxes. I don't want my child to be marked as Black. I want this to be part of the census. So I don't think that that is part of a geographically limited.
Can I add something too? I think time period, right? And has something to do with that, as well as which parent is Black and which parent is white. In my experience, when the father has been Black, when the mother's been Black, there's not been that same kind of biracial push or encouragement or identifying. But when the mother is white, I've heard people quite clearly say, I'm not Black, I'm biracial, or I'm not Black, I'm white like my mother. And I don't see that as much when the mom is Black.
I'm so glad that you said that, because now there is data that talks about what both of you all have said. So there is some generation kind of status, but part of it is your phenotype. So if you look racially ambiguous or mixed or not even, barely Black or whatever, there is people wanting to, there is more people kind of claiming the biracial identity more, especially if they are newer people. Other things kind of that play a role into that, I think, as Maria said, depending on who your parent is. But it's not necessarily also who your parent is who's the one socializing you most. And we know mostly it's the person's mother socializing them. But sometimes that is not always the case. So who is socializing them? And then what environment are they raised in? So if they are raised in a predominantly racially mixed environment, there's opportunities for them to be Black in multiple ways. However, if they're raised in a predominantly white environment, that they might, just to try to survive that environment, they might minimize the Blackness and embrace whiteness as a way to cognitively, emotionally, and psychologically survive that. So there's lots of things at play there.